Thanks everybody, thank you for your time today. Let me just introduce myself first of all. My name's Adrian Cottington. By day, I am the Director in the bank with responsibility for the global corporate banking and payments infrastructure, which sounds really exciting, but when things go wrong and you're carrying £500 billion a day, it's not so much fun. But generally speaking, it's a really exciting job, and thank you for your time today. In terms of me being here today, it's been a bit of a kind of a interesting journey, I guess, really. So Simon and I spoke, well, it must be, 18 months ago? Yeah. Just purely randomly, actually, because I live in Bath. And I've kind of had conversations with Simon and Ian kind of on and off, really, over the past year and a half. And kind of what's happened in parallel with that is, I guess, a massive sea change in Barclays as an organisation, which I'll come back to in a second. So really, I just think, this is very much a right time, right place conversation, really. So I really do hope something comes of it. So just in terms of what I thought I would do, is just a bit of background to Barclays. I think what's really important is you get a bit of insight into the organisation. So there is a small presentation that goes with this, which Ian's going to send out afterwards, but we thought it'd be good for me to talk you through it first. And then you can read the presentation afterwards. So about Barclays, the bits that you probably all know. So it's a 300-year-old company. We've just celebrated our 300th year, I guess. So we've been around a long time. We've got 140,000 people work for the bank, so it's a huge organisation. Our headquarters are in Canary Wharf, which is where I work, so I commute from Bath to Canary Wharf every day, which is fun in itself. So I think I spend more time on trains than I do in the office, but it's worth it for the fact we live in Bath. So it's got I guess a reputation as very much as a UK bank, that's where it is and that's where its roots are. But it's not kind of really anymore. So most of our profits, in terms of the size of the organisation, we turn over a profitability about £5 billion a year. And that's actually this results week next week. So I'll tell you next week how last year went. But we're not really a UK company anymore, to be honest with you. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of that, of those 140,000 people, 60,000 of them work for an African bank that we own majority shares in. Okay, we've got massive captive servicing operations out in India. So we don't outsource to third parties. We largely use our own organisations. So we've got a big captive organisation offshore. In terms of markets, the bank covers investment banking. It's got a big wealth management, like private banking for high net worth individuals. Big corporate bank, servicing big corporates and their banking needs. Retail bank, Barclaycard is the biggest credit card provider in Europe. It's got well over 20 million, card holders. It's merchant service provider in the UK. So about 25% of the UK economy goes through Barclaycard services every day. So in terms of the interrelationship between Barclays and both the UK economy and the global economy, it's much bigger than probably historically people might have thought, and we have fingers in many a bit, which is that it is a heavily regulated environment, and from that perspective, it is quite, let's say, process rich is one way of putting it, but it is a highly bureaucratic organisation. Some people really enjoy it, some people don't. And Barclays is unique in a bad way sometimes, in the sense that it is a very bureaucratic organisation. It also can be it also can be extremely rewarding to work in as well as an organisation, I find. And if you have a good idea and it's the right fit, then the world's your oyster. So although sometimes getting a good idea grounded and getting something moving can be challenging, because all the regulatory things we have to do, it's not, we don't choose to put controls in. They're things we have no choice to do. But once you have a good idea and it's grounded itself in our strategy, then really the world's your oyster, really. And I found that time and time again, which is that the right ideas go a long way. So that's one thing just to keep in mind, and that can lead on to the next point, really, which is, and we'll talk about the themes in a minute. But because of the regulatory environment, because we're dealing with public, sensitive information, personal financial information security is a really big deal. And that kind of gives us a bit of a challenge, really, because in terms of our strategy, what we're trying to do is remove bad volumes. What bad volume is that if you talk about the source of something and its end destination, the much you can remove layers of administration and put it in self-help, direct customer access to information, all those kind of things, then that's got to be a good thing. Because you take out costs, you improve your service, is a really important thing. But the more you remove those layers, the more difficult it is to have controls. Because you're exposing information direct to the customer that they haven't seen before. So by definition, you have to be really, really hot on your information controls. And that gives you a bit of a dichotomy, really, because you want to drive that kind of value add through exposing that information, but you also have to make sure that you have the right controls in place. And that's always an interesting challenge for us as well. I guess another thing about Barclays, I guess it is that global reach, and that's quite another thing to kind of keep in mind. So don't think you're working with a UK retail banking organisation. That definitely, where our roots are, but that kind of represents about 25% of our total business. And it's a very much a stable business where the future of the retail banking is very much about doing banking in a different way. If you think back 3 or 4 years, probably no more than that, you would probably walk in to do most of your banking, pay in a cheque, get a statement, all those kind of things. You would walk into a bank, and I don't think Barclays is really any different from HSBC or from Lloyds or any others where you kind of don't do that anymore, really. Most of us just use our mobile phones. I mean, it's funny how things change so quickly, because it was only kind of 2 years ago that, I'm sure we were all the same. We went from going into branches all the time to using, mobile banking on our laptops. That's how we would do our banking. And suddenly we've gone from that onto tablets and mobile phones. And very rarely do we go into a branch other than to pay a check-in. But really, we move most of our money around using our mobile phone now. We pay for things using our mobile phone, and the world's changing. So that exposure of that information is both a hindrance, but also a huge opportunity as well. But as I say, they're the two big things I just wanted to talk to you about in terms of what it's like to do business with Barclays, which is it's extremely exciting, great company to work for, but it is a regulated company, and there are certain conditions that kind of go with that. In terms of the kind of ideas that kind of stick, it's the new ideas, really. They're the ones that really kind of will fly, I think. So I guess what we really come out of this is just, although we've put some themes forward, don't be tied down by that. The whole point about innovation and entrepreneurship is you have ideas that we haven't. It's an extremely capable organisation full of very, very clever people, certainly a lot more clever than me. I'm sure, having worked in an organisation this size and with that much history, after a while you get lost in the legacy, you kind of get lost in the culture, and sometimes you can't see the wood for the tree. So what's really important is in these kind of partnerships is, this is not about us helping you develop your idea. This is as much about you kind of helping us in our creative thinking and our future business strategy. That's certainly the way I see it. Historically, the true value in the organisation was kind of hidden a bit by the fluctuations of the financial markets. You could never really see if a financial organisation was really at its core profitable, efficient, effective, because you had this wrapper of derivatives and investments and all these things that happen outside of the kind of retail banking business, and you can never really understand if a company was almost profitable or not. And guess what? In 2008, in October, Lehman's found out they weren't, and we found out they weren't, and then everybody else kind of found out they weren't as well. And that's really where the world's changing, really, and it is the whole value proposition of a bank, whereby the investment banking business and the retail banking business are really being pulled apart. And the reason for that is so you can actually see, to make sure an organisation is solvent, to make sure an organisation is profitable, and that at its core we are getting the value back to our shareholders with a long-term view. You only do that if you are efficient and you provide services that the public actually want. And when you have that investment layer veneer around it, you just don't know. And when you strip those profits from investment banking away, that's when you really find out if an organisation is effective or not in financial services. And that's what we've done, what any banks have to do, which is, it's about transparency, it's about solvency, it's about, making sure we have the assets to cover our long-term liabilities, making sure that from a regulatory perspective, all those things are important. So what that's driven really is the fact that, Barclays was one of the very few banks actually, I guess, to come out unscathed to some degree from the financial crisis. So it was to demonstrate our, that long-term profitability. We have to make sure we're efficient, and we're providing products which are innovative and help us to operate at the appropriate cost base. So the current view, I guess, is we need to do more, given that injection of capital from the Middle East and other parts of the world. Our shareholders want that return on their investment, and all if your internal operations and aren't efficient and your external offerings are not attractive, then you're not going to be able to do that. So that's why I think this kind of thing really comes in. The organisation has transformed massively over the past 2 years. 180 degrees. Which it was an insight. For me now, having lived through the last 3 years and working with Barclays, it is a absolute core to our strategy. There are 4 or 5 operating principles that we go to, and this kind of innovation, entrepreneurial engagement is absolutely one of the 4 or 5 things our CEO Anthony Jenkins absolutely lives and breathes by. His very first job was behind a counter in Barclays when he was 15. He's now CEO. He used to be chief executive of Barclaycard. He knows his stuff, and he's taken that kind of ethos with him, I guess, really. So he's really driven that down in the organisation. And that's why this is really important. So what I've done is set out kind of 4 or 5 themes, really, whereby I've looked at our strategy. I've looked at the kind of innovations and ideas that you guys maybe have in terms of your portfolio, and I just hope through an iterative and kind of fairly informal process, maybe have in terms of your portfolio. And I just hope through an iterative and kind of fairly informal process things, right? So the first one is business intelligence, and what I mean by that is that if you can imagine the huge amount of data that the bank holds, that there must be implicit value in there somewhere, and sometimes it's the tools and it's the thinking that brings it out, which is really important. And there's 2 bits to it. There's using it internally, and there's exposing it externally. So that's the first theme, and that leads on to the second one, I guess, really, and it's the obvious one. Certainly for us, a small company at this point in time, is how we use technology, particularly digital technology, to really improve our customer propositions. It could be mobile applications, it could be anything, I guess, really. But Barclays was behind the curve in this part of the market. So utilising digital services is really important, and just again keep in mind that we're not just a retail bank. Don't just limit your thinking to a retail customer like all of us. I think we also provide banking services to massive corporates. There's Barclaycard where you can tap and pay with your mobile phone, all those kind of things. So just make sure you keep broad thinking. The next thing is transformation, I guess, really, and using technology to solve business problems. And they could be business problems, or they could be technology problems. And I'll give you again, it's important to tell stories as we go through and give you some real examples, so that I want to back these things up with things that have really happened. On this one, an example actually would be something we've really struggled with as an organisation, because for confidentiality reasons, I can't tell you how much our technology budget is per year, but it's billions, right? So it's a big number. And from that perspective, the number of assets that we have to manage to actually provide that service, there are well over 1,000 different applications. I can't, we have data centres all over the world. I can't tell you how many individual servers we've got. Probably it's at least tens of thousands, probably near 100,000. So it's big numbers, but that's by the by, I guess, really. But managing that kind of a portfolio of that size, when all these applications are all linked in together, is really important, because you don't want to pull a lever over here in kind of India and suddenly everything falls over in data centres in the UK. And any big organisation struggles with that. And we actually struck up a partnership with Tech City over in Shoreditch. Who I know you guys have worked with in the past. And we actually happened to host a lunch over there. And this guy walked in, and he did a very similar kind of session as we were hoping to get planned actually. And he developed a tool which was about, which we could use with any well-known kind of configuration management system. I've used the word transformation probably a little bit too much in here, but it is a big deal for us right now because it is about taking out bad volumes. It is about being an efficient bank. We do employ 140,000 people. We do have high operating costs. So operational transformation is pretty key. So it's taking out those layers of inefficiency that allow us to increase our give back to our shareholders. So that's really important. And most of our cost action is in that space. So innovation's great, but cost is a big agenda item for us right now. Yeah. So of course providing great products and services is important, but realistically we're in a pretty stable, saturated market. So and then as it kind of wraps up, so the actual event itself, what we're planning to do is, and there's no specific numbers or types, is have an event in Canary Wharf. So obviously our headquarters in Canary Wharf. As well. In terms of how the event's going to work, that's kind of a 50-50 thing really. We want to organise it in such a way that it makes sense to you. We don't want to make it a kind of a very sterile presentation. I'd rather make it much more two-way, much more informal, and banking's much less stuffy than you might think it is. So if you walked into the Barclays office now, what you'd see is nobody's sitting in regimented desks anymore. Nobody has their own desk anymore. Most people kind of either just do their work on their own Mac, or they work from home. It's kind of characterised by flexible work areas, by collaboration areas, all that kind of stuff. It's just nothing like you might think it is, or certainly how it was 3 or 4 years ago. So it's very, it's changed massively, and it's a great thing to be involved in, just to see how much it changed the last 2 or 3 years. Free-thinking people in a room with some experienced banking and technology folk, and having a good two-way conversation. So I think you guys have to go into this without, and you'll see in the presentation actually, if I'm honest with you, you guys have to go into it a little bit without really having too much of an eye on the end of the journey. So I think it's a case of, as a very minimum, I think it's taking some baby steps, which kind of helps you as individuals, this organisation and Barclays understand a bit more about each other, and understand what it's like to do business with a large regulated corporate organisation. And so in terms of as a kind of a good and valuable engagement, then that's got to be the right thing to do. And listen, if some good things come out of it, and there are some real firm propositions that are worth taking forward, then fantastic. I'd love nothing more. But I just know what it's like, if you're a small organisation going through the fun that is procurement in a financial services organisation. That's why I was really clear from day one, which is I just want to make sure we kind of have a good, agile process, take it one step at a time. Let's have a good event in April, get some good ideas flowing, and if there's some good stuff that can come out of it, then it'll just happen. Think about the end-to-end value chain, because there are, though Barclays or any bank or whatever, may provide your ideas as a channel to somebody else. So we might have relationships with other third parties which you might not normally have access to, and maybe merchants is a good idea on services which we could combine as a proposition from the bank by in partnership. So it's a three-way partnership almost, because actually Simon and I were discussing that earlier on. Actually, funny enough, absolutely. The other thing, just to be clear, actually, before I forget. So although my role in the bank is technology, this isn't a technology forum in terms of ideas. So many of your ideas might well be technology based, but that isn't prescriptive. So just take my job title out of it when it comes to the ideas, because it could be anything, to be honest with you.